You're listening to Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Leia. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Colleen from Oregon. Colleen's an individual that I've been talking to off and on to try to get on the show. And Colleen's had some very interesting things happen that she's going to share with us today. But thank you so much for coming on the show, and welcome, Colleen.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Basically, I grew up out here, was born in Oregon City, grew up hunting, fishing, camping, and hiking with my dad and my family, and feel really comfortable out in the woods. And never really thought about it too much. Bigfoot was just kind of like an emblem, like a character like Smokey the Bear or something like that. So I never really thought twice about it. On 2020, I was living on Sauvie Island. It's like a big river island that's really close to Portland, Oregon. It's on the Columbia River, and it's like 35 square miles. It's a really big island. I didn't know how big it was when I started living on there, and it was really special to be living out there because it's like a big agricultural community, and it's known for having beaches that people like to go to, and the locals kind of suffer a little bit because it's a bit overused, underfunded, and they kind of suffer a little bit for having people come out there and just tear it all up, basically. But during the shutdown, I kind of felt lucky to be out there. It was just me and my partner and our dog, and we had like this double wide right on the river in this little trailer court, really. And so there's a lot of areas all over the island that are privately owned. They're in a trust with the state and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So they do open up these interior areas for just a part of the year, less than half of the year. It's open for people to go out and spend some time, respectfully. And so we'd go out for walks all the time, take Kansas the dog. And one of these spots, I call the Savannah because it was just like big open grassland. And some folks have their cattle out there, and there's some lakes and, really nice stands of trees, and it's just really pretty. So it's only 2 miles down the road from where we were living. So we hop in the car, and we're going to go out there, and it's like September. It's right before they're going to shut down the island, basically, for this hunting season. And so we're just trying to get out there a little bit before, we're not allowed to be out there. And we turn off the main road onto a dirt road and it's kind of a longer drive to the cattle guard that we got to go over, which is on the dike for the Columbia River. It's like a straightaway, and we're cruising down at about like 20 miles an hour because we kick up a lot of dust. And I'd say that the stretch is about half mile to 3/4 mile before you get to the end where you enter the pasture land. And getting towards the end, me and my partner were just kind of rambling along, and about 60 feet, maybe yards. I'm not really the best with this, but there was a black individual that came out from what I thought was a trail at the time, and he was crossing kind of diagonally to a access road for fields. They have like all these cornfields because they're trying to bring in migratory birds and deer and whatever else. So there's all these access roads to these adjacent fields. So he was crossing, diagonally kind of towards us and continuing on this access road. And so when he enters our vision from behind, kind of some tall trees and blackberry bushes growing into the trees, we didn't say a word to each other. We were just looking at this and trying to understand what we were looking at. And when he steps out into the gravel road, he looks at us, and it almost seems like he's not expecting us to be there, but he doesn't change his posture. He doesn't speed up. He doesn't, he looked right at me and continued crossing the road. And my partner at the time, he's like slowing down, obviously, because someone's crossing. And I don't remember what I said, if I said anything, but we slowed down and were just kind of in shock, I think. And so as we continue to roll up to the access road, we stop to see if we can see him walking down further. And that's where we saw him about 50, again, possibly 60 feet down. And there's the blackberry brambles. It's a hedge that's kind of a barrier for, I believe, cornfield that's beyond it. And he's standing there waiting for us almost. And so we look at each other again, and we just sit there for a few seconds, and then he dips into the hedge and he's out of view. And we never talked about it. I think that our relationship was getting 2020 pretty hard. We ended up, splitting up the following February. So I wonder if that was a part of it. Our communication was just kind of shot to pieces already. And so we weren't, or how I feel about it is like, it took me years to digest just that small window of time that experience was, until I was just kind of like, yeah, that happened. I saw him with someone. And so it wasn't until the end of last year that I kind of just started thinking about it again. So, almost 4 years later, I'm just kind of like, yeah, okay. So it's all Bigfoot. And I hadn't talked to anyone about it, not a soul. And I was sitting at like a local bar, and I kind of threw it out there, and yeah, people were like, okay, okay, Colleen, sure. And but after that was when I was still having drinks, and I after the bar closed one night, I invited a couple of my friends up. I just got a cat, and I was trying to socialize them. He was a really cute little kitten, and they came up and we sipped some wine, and I was like, okay, these are my friends, and I'm just gonna share it with them. And I told them the story. And one friend, he didn't say anything really. He wasn't critical, and he didn't have any experience himself. He just kind of listened. And then uh, my other friend made me like repeat it like 3 times. And each time that I kind of ran over it again, I could tell that he was very skeptical of it. And I was like, sure, this is, I totally should expect this. And then on the third run through the story, he's like, what do you mean he was waiting for you? And I was kind of like, yeah, like, what do I mean? I don't really know what I mean by that. Like, why was he, why was he still standing there waiting, looking at us? And at any rate, he never was very satisfied with anything that I had to say to like clarify my experience or anything like that. But a few months later, he was van living, and sometimes he'd stay on a friend's property on the island, which wasn't far from where we were at. And I was working nights, so I was up usually, and he calls me in the middle of the night, and he sounds really shook, and he's just saying, I am so sorry that I made you explain yourself. I'm sorry I made you feel like you were lying. But there's that it's walking around my van, and I am so freaked out right now. And I just was like, oh, some people, they go real deep, and and there's some folks just roaming a little bit to check their property lines. They could be curious about you being on your friend's property. I wanted to calm them down a little bit, because I didn't want them to be scared like that, even though I did feel this kind of like, somebody believes me, like, I don't sound so crazy now to this person, and that I found a little bit of comfort in. But that around that time, since I was kind of trying to, wrap my head around that experience from 2020, I got on the internet, and I really didn't go very deep. I just found some Reddit threads and I, um, didn't see any other sightings in that area. And, but I heard about like tree knocking and the structures and stuff. And I was like, yeah, that's, that doesn't really apply to my experience. And I didn't really get the tree knocking. But we fast forward to about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, going on 6 weeks ago, I had been really struggling with making ends meet, and I had a living situation completely fall to pieces, and I was just, I kind of had it, and I was going to go for a walk and clear my head out on some trails outside of Scappoose. And I go out on these trails. It's really nice, but it's hot lately, so I could hear some water below. And I was like, man, why don't these trails just go down to this little creek that's lame, I think I can make it down to this little creek, So I go off trail, and I get down to this cute little creek, and there's this little open area, and I spend some time down there, and I'm like, okay, so I should probably get back out before it starts getting dim out here. And I looked the way I came, and I was like, man, that was kind of a little hairier than it looked. Maybe if I just follow along this creek a little bit, there'll be another way up that won't be as rough, So I'm kind of following a little deer trail along this creek, and it starts kind of getting, full of stinging nettles, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of ridiculous, but it would be even more ridiculous to turn around, like I felt like I knew like how I'd get back to the road that my car was parked on. I never felt lost. I never admitted to myself that I was, at any rate. And so I'm getting out there, and I'm seeing tracks for animals in the mud, and that's mostly deer and raccoon. And I know that there's homesteads out there. I'm half expecting to just like bust through somebody's, rhododendrons into their backyard, which would have been embarrassing, but I was open to that at this moment, And I kind of come to this point where the creek really becomes thick brush, and there's some big down trees, and I just kind of take a minute and really think about, what am I going to do next? Which way do I think is best to go? And I decided that I needed to go up this ridge. I I was like, I know there's a road up there. I think it's like 40 feet up. I can see it kind of flattens out, and I bet you that's a road. And so I'm going up, and I'm feeling absolutely ridiculous. Like, you just hear stories of hikers getting lost and getting choppered out, and I'm just always like thinking that these folks are idiots, And here I am, kind of getting into some really thick stuff, but still not admitting that I'm completely lost. I know that there's a way out, and that there's property, there's something I'm going to come across, So I get up to where my visual perception stopped, and it did level out, but it continued up again. And so I'm so exhausted by this point. But I got to do it. I got to go up, and I, get up this ridge, and it's got some trees, so I can kind of take some breathers here and there. And I'm like, oh, I can see it. I can see the road. Okay. And I'm getting this like anxious push to get to it, and I step through a pile of a wood, and I'm all, what's that? And it's hornets. I stepped into a nest of ground hornets underneath this wood pile, and they were all over me. And I'm allergic to bees. I never carry a shock kit, but I should, because they told me that if I was to get into anaphylactic shock again, it would happen faster. I'd probably have about 15 minutes if I was to ever get stung again. That happened a long time ago when I was a child, but when this is happening to me, I just try to run, and I'm not very good at running at this point. I'm exhausted, and I'm screaming, just screaming. I can't even hear myself, but I know I'm screaming, and they're just staying on me. They're in my hair, they're in my clothes, they're like, and all the tender underarm areas are just what a mess. And I probably had gone about 100 feet, like along the ridge. And finally, I just laid down, and most of them had left me alone. There was a couple diehards, but I just was like, okay. So I'm just got to sit here, and I got to figure out if I'm gonna go into anaphylactic shock here. I'm kind of waiting to see if I have any breathing issues, and just kind of give myself a minute. And I want to slow my heart rate down if I can. And I managed to do that a little bit, and I come to the conclusion that I'm not going into anaphylactic shock. And how lucky I to be able to get up and step onto this logging road that was 3 feet from me. Like, I just step out onto this road, and I'm just can't believe that I just climbed up that thing. I look down, and I can't even see the creek anymore. I can't even hear the creek anymore. And I'm looking at this road, and I decide, okay, like, let's go to the left. I think that this is the way that I need to go. I start walking, and it wasn't long before I came to where they had bulldozed a berm. And I think it was going to go back down into this ridge line. So I just kind of was like, oh, all right, I don't think I should go this way. This isn't the answer. So I turn around, and I start retracing my steps. And I come to where I came out, and continued. And there was a split. And I had been observing a lot of scat on the logging road, which was pretty overgrown in some areas with blackberry brambles and other small brush. And I was seeing that looks like black bear scat there, and that's mountain lion. Okay, and there's a lot of it. And then there was a huge, like, more than a foot across pile. And I was like, what? They were all full of blackberry seeds, and I just kind of thought to myself, these guys are probably pretty tired of eating blackberries right about now. Just and so I made my decision on what road I was going to take at this split. And about 20 feet into that part of the road, I hear behind me a click, click, clack. And it's like, I felt like it was like a long-haired cat that was all poofed out. Like, I felt like I just felt like I spiky. Like, I don't know how to describe how all these hairs that I don't have were standing up, like, all around me. And I look over my shoulder, but I didn't stop, and there was nothing. But I could tell from where the sound came from, it was just next to the road where I had passed twice. And the logging road made this nice little flat space, but the ridge continued, so the sound was above my head. And I just kind of was like, oh, it's because the ridge continues at a really steep incline. And But that was not a woodpecker. And I just was I think that I was already in a moderate, on its way to severe state of shock from the hornet's nest. And this happened. And I was just kind of like, I don't know, like what this being is expecting for a response from me right now, but I'm just kind of fucking sure, of course, this is going to happen now. This is when it's going to happen, is when everything's just completely out of control. And I was really lucky because the sun was beginning to go down, and I had gone in to this hike around like 10 in the morning, and I'm looking at the sun, figuring what time it was, trying to figure out my position, and how much time do I have before this place gets really dark, and just more scary because of that than it's ever been before for me in my life. And I came across some trees that were downed on this logging road that I guess hasn't been surveyed in quite some time. But it was, trees up by their roots, stacked over each other, blocking the road, which I was kind of like, oh, that kind of seems recent. These trees seem like they're still alive, even, and I don't really remember us having, really strong weather in any sense in this area. So that's kind of interesting. It took a while for me to like start feeling like I wasn't being observed, because that's how I felt. In that instance, it took probably like a mile before I was like, I can kind of just breathe a little easier. But I just was, I just was keeping my pace, and I didn't make any wrong turns because there was a number of splits that I came across, and I came out of these logging roads. I mean, they're supposed to be closed. I'm not supposed to be in there. I'm trespassing. I think that it might have been like Weyerhaeuser land outside. And I made it out to Dutch Canyon Road and walked out, and that's kind of the end of where that experience is. The thing about the click, click, clack, was that the 3 knocks were a very precise beat. They didn't, they were, it was a very tight beat. But the third was a completely different pitch, which it just confuses me still, because I'm just like, okay, so, like if you take a 2x4, like maybe the wide side makes a different sound than the short side, because this guy didn't set something down and pick up another one, to make a different pitch and sound than the other two. That's the part where it just really got my attention, that that something intelligent was trying to convey a point to me. And I was pretty, I don't know, I don't want to say it stressed me out necessarily, but it did. I kind of became hyper fixated on trying to understand this more. And I don't really have a lot of close friends at this point in my life. And But I'm spending time with my mom trying to build things up from the ground up here, and talking to her about it, and she's like, he could have been trying to let you know that was the right way to go, to encourage you to get out the right way, And I just kind of was like, yeah, that totally could make sense. I just can't know uh, in that respect. Um, and so since that, last 6 weeks or so, I've kind of really immersed myself in people's stories, and um, I've, you know, kind of have a different perspective on a couple of things about living on Sauvie Island. Like I thought that I was totally hoo-hooing with an owl out there, out past the tree line, across from our porch. And I just felt like, like a nature woman. Like I thought I was, I had an owl friend. Like, how cool is that? And I mean, I saw that owl. It came and checked me out on the beach one night. So I was sold. But every time, and I was kind of like, well, where is this guy? Where in the trees is this guy that's out here that's always responding to me when I'm making my crappy owl call? And I kind of look at that very differently now. And then there was also a night where we had the thickest fog I've ever seen on the island, being on the river like that, and all the leaves had fallen. This might have been after, I think it was possibly after our seeing him crossing. And I was out sitting on the porch having ciders, and I can hear somebody walking in the leaves out in front of where we park our cars. And I was like, who is this person walking in the trees over here? And I was thinking that it was somebody that was trying to uh, have an encampment nearby, and thought that there being a really thick fog would be a good time to go poke around. And I didn't like that. So I started kind of like talking. I was like, this is really not a good idea for you to be poking around here. And I called my partner out, and I'm just like, there's somebody walking out over here. And he's just, like I said, our relationship was kind of shot to pieces at that point. And there's a can of cider in my hand, and he's just kind of like, okay, all right, Colleen, whatever. And he goes inside. He never hears anything because he doesn't believe me. He doesn't spend any time on the porch with me. And so it's just me and this person that, I mean, 30 feet from me, and when I talked to it, it stopped. It was listening to me. And I was like, hey, folks over here, they just, or on the island itself, they do not take kindly to folks wandering around on properties. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get shot. Like, you need to think about that, and be very, very careful. I wasn't like threatening it to shoot it or anything, but it needs to know that it's very dangerous to be going around people's homes like that. It's just very dangerous. And it did. It just kind of started backing up, and I think it went towards this tree line that I would hoo-hoo at from my porch. And I just never put all that together ever before that. So, yeah. And then there was even when we'd go camping, we'd always camp out on Mount Hood, and we'd go out 224 to 46, out past Ripple Brook, ranger station, and we had this spot called Big Fan. And this is way back in the day when there wasn't a lot of people out there ever. And the ranger would come and try to sell you firewood and warn you to not have your fire too big. And some really big trees out there. And it's right on the Kallawash where it splits off into the Clackamas River. It's a really beautiful site, and it's big enough to hold a couple families. So one year we went with another family. And that night, my friend's dad, he's like, "So you know about the mountain men, right?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay. You know, uh, this is some campfire stuff. Sure." I think I was 12 at the time. And he's like, "Yeah, there's mountain men out here." And then my dad's standing there, and I think he's trying to mitigate where he thinks this is going, because we never talked about Bigfoot, more than Harry and the Hendersons. It was. And my dad's like, "There are some men that come back from Vietnam that did not adjust to society, and they prefer to stay out in the woods." And my friend's dad, I think, takes his cue and kind of lets up a little bit. And he's like, "No, they come into your camp at night when everyone's asleep, and they just take some beer and some hot dogs, just enough for a snack, you know." And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure." So I stayed up. I stayed up and I waited and made sure everybody was asleep before I let myself fall asleep. And I got up first as well. And I went and I looked in that cooler, and sure enough, there was less stuff in there. And I was like, "Man, I didn't hear anything come into camp." So it just really fascinated me that there's peopling around me, and I can't hear, see, or be aware of them at all. It just totally blew my mind. What I didn't know was that was probably one of the last times that our family went camping out there together. My dad's mental health kind of started to deteriorate, and having teenagers just was it's wearing our parents out, and we just never did it again. But I remember we had gone back to that spot yearly, and after I set up my tent that I shared with my sister and brother, I was kind of like, "Oh, I'll just kind of lay here for a minute." And I like laid there, and I could just hear the trees, and I was like, "Man, it just feels like they remember me, like like we're familiar to the trees." And I had like these thoughts about, like, when people pass away, they kind of, after a certain point, they kind of become more elemental, and they come into the forest, and some of it's dark and some of it's not, but it's just so beautiful, big, and sacred, um and I just always thought that I'm a really weird kid. Like, like, I wouldn't even share those thoughts with anyone, because I was that weird kid, and I wasn't trying to perpetuate it more than it already was that way. I wanted to be normal so bad. and um and yeah, like, that's basically all the past. And now we're living in this remote area, an unincorporated land that abuts BLM land with transmission lines, wooden transmission lines. There's a reservoir nearby with a preserve forest around it. And behind our property, the forest goes all the way to the coast for 40 miles. And I don't want to go for walks by myself. Me and my mom will walk when she's up for it, and we'll just take a little walk down logging road on our neighbor's property. And so, last week we take the dog And even my cat went with me that time, Billy. He's a year and a half, and he wanted to follow us. And, I totally am into that. But he was freaked out about the forest. It's pretty overwhelming for a little guy. And we're only like 150 feet from the house. And me and my mom and got the dog, and she's a little further up. And I'm trying to coax Billy because he's timid. But when I looked back at Billy, he was frozen. He was locking eyes with something. And my mom's continuing to walk. And so I'm like, oh, I better go pick him up. I'm going to go get him. And I walk up. And as soon as I come close enough to him, he's like, yep, let's get out of here. He starts walking back. And I go to pick him up, and I can hear movement on either side of this logging road. And I finished picking up Billy, and he is all about being held at this moment. And I can hear the tree knocks. And I caught 3, but I went, hey, Mom. And she stopped and waited for me to catch up with her with Billy in my arms, let me carry him a whole 50 feet. And I was like, I thought I heard some tree knocks there, I thought I heard 3, what did you hear? She's like, I heard 4 or 5. And they were gentle. They weren't Louisville slugger tree knocks. And then whatever, we continue. And I wanted to check out this kind of overgrown road. It was pretty near where our stopping point was last time. And I was thinking about leaving a special rock or something, but I didn't bring one with me. So we go down this little road, and I thought I saw visual movement, but whatever, possibly a deer. And we stand there a little bit, and then there's, a rapid 5 knock. And we're just like, okay, let's go ahead and head back. And then there was a ground squirrel that started calling, super aggro, yoked out squirrel out there, just calling on when we started heading out. And I was just kind of like, that's pretty interesting. So, yeah, growing up out here and living out here is really great. But all of a sudden, very recently, there's just this whole new kind of shift in my perception for it. And it's been pretty challenging to adjust to it because I need to just go to work, and it's kind of, you have this mind-blowing experience, and then you just got to go do some really mundane stuff. How could you do anything else when this is, has so much meaning behind it? That means so much other stuff is real and true, and it's just kind of shatters your agreed upon understanding of your reality. And I just, there's a part of me that was just like, man, that's, in a way, it can be really scary. And this is the kind of stuff in the 20th century that people would try to put these folks into a cage so you can observe them and feel safe. And they need to be protected. They're in a lot of danger, all these fires and people literally trying to make history in some gruesome way. It's pretty scary. So I just kind of worry about them now. So,
Colleen, you definitely have been through a lot. Thank you for sharing that entire account. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about different things?
Sure. Okay. Sure, go ahead.
First off, I want to say I'm glad you're okay. In general, I'm very glad you're okay. Keep being okay. All right.
Thanks.
Yeah. So it feels like there was a point where you'd said that you may have had a visual of something, but the way you were talking about, it feels like you may have talked yourself out of it. Maybe
Right.
like when our logical, I say like when our logical side of our brain kind of talks too loud and it over talks our Bigfoot side. Do you remember anything about what you think you may have seen or any details about that time?
So you're talking about walking along with my mom
Yeah.
a week ago?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So, I had looked down this little road and it's completely covered in green, but it's really wide. And I figure there might have been a road to an old homestead. It's very level. And it looks like the creek, it even has like a, uh, a culvert so that the road continues over the creek. And I just kind of was curious if the road turned a little bit. So I had stepped into the road so that all of that vision was open to me. And as I looked down, it was like uh, a blur of, and it was like maybe a little black, maybe a little tan, and it was just to the right, which there was no rushing through the brush. The, I mean, the forest floor over here isn't the thickest brush in all places. Sometimes you could see pretty far as far as like, forest floors are concerned. But in this area, there there was it was pretty thick, and there's the creek right there. So you really just couldn't vanish without making a sound. And even like when you alert a deer, because we come across deer quite often, and they freeze, and they're perfectly fine locking eyes with you, but they'd rather just kind of stay still as long as you don't move towards them, and they'll do that until you move out of their visual spectrum enough that they'll move off, or you'll get them spooked, and then they'll make noise. They'll do their little prance hop away, and that is a very particular sound. And there was none of that, absolutely none of that. But the sounds that we heard, the 5 tree knocks, which were softer, so they weren't alerting everyone within a mile and a half. They were alerting us or someone closer to them, perhaps. And it wasn't necessarily threatening, but it was definitely like a very thorough acknowledgement, and it would have been in the general direction that this movement that I saw was going in. You know, when we came back down the road on the way home, I was like, so I know I heard movement on both sides, but I don't know what Billy was looking at. And the 5 tree knocks came from that side of the road, and I was like, I want to pay extra attention, because they've done some logging nearby, and they got bulldozers um, busting up the ground on the road, so it's much easier to leave an imprint. So I was trying to pay a little extra attention. We didn't see anything, but certainly our Calhoun Ricky was certainly very interested in some areas, was alerting in other areas, and and later that night, my mom's husband went to bed, and so I was like, so about that, what do you think it was? And she's like, I don't know what that was. All right, well, was it a woodpecker? She goes, no, that was not a bird. And I was like, okay, and that's as far as it went. But I definitely feel like this would be ideal area for an animal to live, except that we're closer and closer to more developed areas. But like I said, from here west, it's just all forest. So.
That's wild, and that was just a week ago. And yeah. that's very interesting. Definitely keep me in the loop about that, because I mean there could be other stuff that happen out there easily. So
Yeah, I feel like I asked my mom about our property that we're on, and I was like, how long has this been a home, and the property goes back in record to like 1905, so this wasn't recently settled, which I would think would, I would expect more disruption if that were the case. If you had recently encroached on areas that may have been considered somebody else's, that they would be more apt to being a little bit more upset about being disturbed. But from what I understand, like these these folks out here, I think that when they showed up, so were these homes were here. So that's kind of like this understanding that they both exist. And I'm terribly interested to, continue to go for walks, and but I don't want to do it alone. And I just want to be really thoughtful, because like I said before, I want them to stay mysterious in a way. I don't think that it's necessary for, them to be completely understood inside and out, and every little feature of them needs to be documented. And, I don't think that that's necessary at all. And I'm just so worried about them in that way.
yeah, that's very interesting viewpoint, and I can definitely see what you're saying for sure. Do you have any close neighbors to that property?
Right. Yeah, we do. We're at the end of a dirt road that's off of another dirt road,
Mm-hmm.
and there's folks right across from the end of our road from us, and then there's another stead on our road that I would say is like 200 feet or so from us, like maybe an acre away. And they're the ones that have just recently cleared some of this area near where we live. And I think there's even another further neighbor, and their family has large areas of land divided between their family members, and they log from time to time too. But I haven't really gotten to know any of them. What's interesting is that, like, when we get down to the main turnoff to get onto the main paved road, on that corner is a homestead, and they have a wood carving of Bigfoot right there, So it's pretty curious. I wouldn't know how to, from what I understand, we look like Portlanders, basically. So even though her husband grew up around this area, me showing up and my mom, we're these invaders from an urban area that isn't really well looked upon uh, by a large amount of people over a wide area. And so I wouldn't even know how I would begin to broach even a small talk conversation. I think that it would take a lot to gain anyone's confidence at all in this area too, because we're just kind of outsiders. But I would love to though.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's easier said than done, right? Because
Right.
it feels like if I was in that situation, I would definitely want to first know my neighbors. And especially if I was looking into Bigfoot in that situation and one of them has a big, like, carved Bigfoot, I mean, it's like, come on, you got to, right? But again, it's easier said than done. So I don't know if,
Right.
I don't know what I would do in the situation. But
I think that from time to time there's like some sort of a potluck. Maybe just because there's some ranch land, and some of these families go back, I think, to after the Indian Wars, a lot of the folks settled out here. The soldiers, they got some nice picks of land out here before it became settled. And so a lot of these families have been here ever since. And so I think that it would be really cool if I would definitely go and try to socialize and see if I could mention or admire the Bigfoot sculpture and see where it led. So
I got the idea. Okay, here's what you're gonna do. So the next time they have the like potluck or whatever,
yeah,
you make cookies that are in the shape of a Bigfoot.
I can do it.
It's like a conversational piece type deal. I don't know.
I can do that.
There he is. I hear him.
Yeah, he's going wild. Yeah. He's a knucklehead.
What I was going to ask is going back to when you lived on the island and you had the sighting, was it close enough that you could, or do you remember any details about the face or just details about it in general that, made you kind of think like, oh, that's weird, or that is like how they always say it is, or it's not, it's different?
No clothes, obviously. I made eye contact with it. So, but it was all black, and I would say it was 6.5 or 7 feet. I didn't get a really good look at the hands, or I didn't even look at its feet. And even though I was looking right at its face, and I mean, I'm coming towards it, even though we slowed down quite a bit, it was the only thing I was seeing, and I still didn't get like any more definition. It was just kind of all in this mess of black. And I felt like the shape of its head wasn't too cone-like. I felt like it was more rounded, but perhaps was a bit higher. I think that it almost looked normal because some people wear their hair higher up on their head like that, so that didn't even visually seem like too wildly unhuman. I mean, unhuman to me at all. And I just kind of gone back over it, and I think it had to have heard us coming down this gravel road. Why would it do that? And again, you're talking to my mom, and she's like, it could have been a young adult, and it had been, corralled by its parents, telling it no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And it's like finding its own range out there, trying to do its own thing. Not sure why, the previous generations were so paranoid about people, and because it didn't seem afraid. It's almost like it wanted to be seen, which I just boggles my mind. I don't get it at all. And so, I mean, I don't really speak with my partner of that time very much. He started a new relationship and I hope he has success. And so I just try to leave him alone. But I was like, if I'm going to go as far as to talk to you, Jeremiah, I'll go ahead and reach out. So I did. And we were texting and I was like, hey, I was going to ask you a question. And he's like, go ahead. And I'm like, do you remember seeing Bigfoot? And he's like, no. I mean, was it up north? Was it south? Because we were outdoors a lot. And he's from the Olympic Peninsula. And I just gave him the details of it, the synapse. And he goes, I do remember that. And I was just like, okay. It doesn't really do anything. It really doesn't change anything. But it, again, just kind of like when my friend, apologized for being so intense about my story. And then, kind of being like, I apologize about that. It just kind of gave me this like comfort in being believed. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always good to have someone else on your side when you've experienced something that's out of the ordinary like that. I can definitely get that. Who broke eye contact first when you had eye contact with it?
I do believe that it did. Or it might have just gone out of view. But when we pulled up and came to a stop, when we could see him again in this like hedgerow, he had stopped and was waiting and looked and at me. But I mean, my partner was right in line with me, so I would imagine that he may have felt similar, that he also was locking eyes with this, person, basically is how it feels, and there was like this just moment that lasted probably 4 seconds or so, but felt like an extended amount of time before it ducked into the hedges. And then, after my friend was being critical and saying, well, what do you mean by it was waiting for you? He kept asking that over, and I was like, I kind of felt silly, like it was waiting for me. Like, what do I mean? Well, what I think was actually happening is it was trying to make sure we weren't going to turn down that access road, that we weren't going to come and try to get a better look at it. That's what I think makes sense, and after it realized that we weren't turning down that road. I mean, there's no barrier from us to do it, but I would have felt like it was disrespectful. That's an access road for someone's field. I'm not trying to go after onto somebody's private property to that extent, but I know some people would. So it was, worried about it a little bit.
What was the main thing that you noticed that made you give it a kind of a classification of something that was human?
When I looked at this, I never thought about an ape. I never thought about a monkey. I never thought of any sort of primate that I've known of. Like it didn't enter my mind in any way. Like it looked like a hairy person. And I tried really hard to like crank it. And it took me, years of digesting it myself quietly before I could just say it out loud that that was a hairy person. That was a Bigfoot. That was maybe not as large as other Bigfoot. But I mean, I actually recently, they got U-Pick farms out there, and me and my sister took her son out and went berry picking. And I was like, hey, what do you think about throwing the kid out in the water? She had no idea that there were beaches out there. So we did. We went and took the kid out to the beach, threw him in the water. And before we left, I took her down that very road. I wanted to show her the savannah. And as we were coming down, I'm trying to figure out where exactly it was. And it didn't come out of a foot trail. It was an access road also that it had come out of. So it was walking down these access roads. And there's wetlands in between these areas too. There's fields, wetlands, and they'll have like little access footpaths, or you can access some are smaller for 4x4s, and then you have like straight up stuff for trucks. So these are straight up access roads, and they don't line up completely, and so it's the last set of access roads before you really get to the end before the cattle guard. And I finally, riding with my sister, I'm explaining to her, I'm letting her know I had this experience as we're rolling down this road, and I'm looking at these blackberry brambles, which without trees to grow into, blackberry brambles, they'll get like 6 or 7 feet tall or so. But these were growing into trees planted as a barrier for their fields. So the tops of these blackberry brambles were somewhere around 12 feet or more. So I just wonder about like how when you see something, your brain really just tries to cram it into the parameters that it's used to. So maybe it was considerably taller than 6.5, 7 feet, like I originally thought when I had the experience, and it could have been much taller, because there's no street sign pole at the corner there, or a mailbox. It's all just wildland, tall trees and monster blackberry bushes. So there's a question about that in my mind. Yeah.
Would you ever want to see one again?
I don't know. It's kind of interesting because, I loved Jane Goodall, and everybody, wants to feel special, right? I don't necessarily feel special. Okay. I feel like this isn't as a unique experience as we're sold it is. Okay. But there's like this fantasy of like, oh, we could be friends and I can help protect them or something, but I think that the more I see them means that the more that they are exposed to other people, which would endanger them. So in a way, no, I don't. There's, in my heart, I have like this huge love for like this region. It's not just the state of Oregon, it's the Pacific Northwest. I love this landscape in such an intimate way that like growing up here, like, 224 got burnt to a crisp, and when I drove out that way after they opened the road up, I cannot tell you how much it tore me to pieces. And then I couldn't even get to the camp spot to see if those trees that I felt recognized me were there or not. I think they did survive, by the way, but I haven't seen them myself since. But this is like this really deep reverence, and in this feeling of responsibility and this drive to do what I can to preserve it. And I think to do that, you got to let these areas be wild, and protect them. And so, I think that my love for them overpowers this, part of me to have this validating experience. I'd much rather them be safe. And if I had to not ever see one again to ensure their safety, that's what I want.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And I just want to say thank you again for spending some time this afternoon sharing what you've experienced over the years, Colleen. It's been a very interesting conversation, and I appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, I appreciate you making time for me too. Thank you so much.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
Her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. Shame on you.